Mr. Greg Hunt is speaking.
Encourage everybody to step forward, to be vaccinated when you're eligible, and to come back for that second dose. Both parts are critical, and I want to thank and honour the work of Australians in helping to protect other Australians, and invite Professor Melissa Little, who is the co-chair of the Stem Cells Mission, under which there are 17 grants Australia-wide.
Thank you, Minister Hunt, and I would point out that I've been vaccinated, as has Professor North and Professor Sinclair, and it's fantastic that these types of vaccinations are available. And I'd like to just again echo Catherine's comments about how exciting it is to have this fantastic funding roll out from the Medical Research Future Fund. As you've heard, I am the co-chair of the Stem Cell Mission. I'm a stem cell researcher, and my particular research is actually trying to recreate human kidney tissue. And at MCRI, we link our genomics research, where we can identify mutations that cause disease. We can then actually model those diseases.
Vaccinations that have been
Thank you very
around
much for
today.
being here this afternoon. Let me be clear. Australia's borders are closed. There have been about 370,000 people come into Australia, and hotel quarantine's efficiency has been at the level of about 99%. So clearly, hotel quarantine is an effective method of quarantining travellers returning to this country. Recently, in fact this morning, by Premier Palaszczuk and her Deputy Stephen Miles, there have been a range of assertions about the number of people who are coming through quarantine here in Australia. So let me be clear on that. The data from the Australian Border Force sets out very clearly that on average 80% of returning travellers to Australia are either Australian citizens, permanent residents, or immediate family members. So those are statistics that are known by the Australian Border Force, because they know exactly who is coming in to this country. So they know what the statistics are. There has been some misrepresentation of ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, data. Now let's be clear, some of the permanent residents who are coming back to Australia are also dual citizens, and could well be, and in fact some are, known to be travelling on foreign passports. But the data from the Australian Border Force is correct, and the Australian Border Force has now issued a statement dealing with the misrepresentations that have been made about the statistics of incoming passengers earlier today. Now, quite frankly, what Premier Palaszczuk and her Deputy Stephen Miles are doing is trying to create a distraction from their own quarantine failures. The reason that we are in lockdown here, particularly in southeast Queensland, but also in parts of northern Queensland, are because of failures by the Palaszczuk government. Firstly, for the mine worker that came in from Bendigo, they were a low-risk individual, domestic traveller. They were put into hotel quarantine in a room between two high-risk international travellers. And it would appear that as a result of that, that individual has contracted COVID. There's also the failure of Premier Palaszczuk and her Deputy Premier Stephen Miles to make sure that health workers in high-risk areas are properly vaccinated, and that has led to a young worker being infected with COVID. So clearly what Anastasia Palaszczuk is doing is making sure that she is doing as much as she possibly can to ensure that she puts up a smokescreen to hide the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of quarantine that is administered and managed by the Queensland government. Now, it is actually interesting to note that some days Premier Palaszczuk and the Queensland State Labor government choose to push to have people enter this state, particularly those people who are involved in film and television, who are involved in sports. But when they have their own failure that they can't manage, they're very quick to jump up and down, try and blame the Commonwealth government, and then demand that borders be shut down or that caps be reduced. Quite frankly, Queenslanders can see these claims for exactly what they are. They don't stack up, they are a smokescreen, and quite frankly, the Premier needs to get on with managing the state.
Your comments before about the reasoning Will the federal government take any responsibility, especially when it comes to the vaccine rollout?
Well, clearly, the federal government is doing all that it can to ensure that there is a timely and efficient rollout of the vaccine across Australia, and particularly here in Queensland. So there have been over 800,000 doses delivered here to Queensland. About 550,000 doses have been administered. Each week, 55,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine is delivered here in Queensland. At the beginning of July, that will increase to 95,000 doses per week, and by the end of July, that will be 127,000 doses. It is up to the Palaszczuk government to do all that it can to make sure that people are properly vaccinated, and quite frankly, they need to focus on their health workers.
The Queensland Chief Health Officer came out this morning and slammed the AstraZeneca vaccine for unsureties, despite the Prime Minister's comments the other night. Who should people, not only in Queensland but Australia, listen to?
People need to take the advice of their doctor, and that is what the Prime Minister was very clear about. We have made the AstraZeneca vaccine available to people between 18 and 59 who choose to take an informed decision to consult with their doctor, speak with their doctor, take advice from their doctor, and potentially proceed to be vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. That is a conversation that individuals need to have with their own doctor and to take their advice. The Prime Minister was very clear, and I'm also being very clear as well. We are saying you need to speak to your doctor, you need to make an informed decision, and if you consent, you wish to take the AstraZeneca vaccination, it is available for you to do so.
Is it acceptable that a person has flown in and out of Australia to Indonesia multiple times without being vaccinated?
Well, we are going through a process of looking at a whole range of things in terms of access to and from Australia. So exemptions for outward bound passengers and also exemptions for those people coming in. We know that there is an issue with people making multiple trips, and that we need to be very careful and very, very clear that we want people to be able to conduct their business within the regime that we have put in place here for them in Australia.
Can you tell us why that person was given exemptions to travel back and forth, given that there are too many Australians stranded overseas that still want them to come home?
Well, quite frankly, it's one of the issues that we have to deal with now, which is dealing with specific needs of our economy, while at the same time making sure that we are able to bring in as many vulnerable people and return as many Australians as we possibly can. And here in Queensland, we have Anastasia Palaszczuk, who's saying that she wants to go over to the Olympics in Tokyo, and in fact that was one of the reasons that she gave her need to step up and get the Pfizer vaccine. So she's actually at the point of saying that she's arguing against her own travel to Tokyo. It'd be interesting to see what Palaszczuk now has to say about whether or not she's going to travel to Tokyo.
Should it be a condition, do you think, of anyone flying from overseas into Australia that they should be vaccinated?
I think it's one of the things that we need to reflect upon, but we are going to be taking the health advice in relation to vaccines. At this point in time, that is not a prerequisite to travel.
What about the weekly caps on international arrivals? Do you think they should be reduced?
I don't think the weekly caps should be reduced. I've said for many months now that we need to learn to live and to work in the COVID environment in which we find ourselves. And the first response should not be to close down our borders. Now, there are caps in Queensland. It's about 1,000 a week to come in. New South Wales is about 3,000 a week to come in. It's quite frankly not a lot. We do need to be able to return Australians, and they will be coming in under those caps. But we do have state premiers who are prepared to bring in people above those caps as it suits them, and that's what has happened in many cases. The federal government's priority is to do all we can to get Australian citizens into the country and Australian permanent residents and their immediate family.
Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews there speaking on the Gold Coast, defending the government's policy on the number of people coming into Australia from overseas. This is after comments from the Queensland Premier and Deputy Premier today, criticising the numbers of people being allowed to leave and return to Australia who were doing so for work purposes. Karen Andrews there saying that figures from Border Force show that 80% of those returning travellers are Australian citizens, returning residents or family members of residents rather than people travelling for work. And she said the comments were made by leaders of the Queensland government to be a smokescreen to distract from the government's failures in the state's quarantine system, said Karen Andrews. And just on the confusion around who should be getting the AstraZeneca vaccine, Karen Andrews said that the advice is clear, that people from all age groups should talk to their doctor about the risks of getting the AstraZeneca jab before making a decision. That's the latest from the Home Affairs Minister. We are taking you back to Victoria now, where the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, has been speaking.
Look, I respect all of the different views around the country. Critically, what we've done is continue to follow the medical advice. And the medical advice from ATAGI, which is the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, is that AstraZeneca is preferred for over 60s, that Pfizer is preferred for under 60s. But I think it is important to actually quote ATAGI, and just to provide the context, ATAGI's advice is COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca can be used in adults aged under 60 years of age for whom Pfizer is not available. The benefits are likely to outweigh the risks for that individual, and the person has made an informed decision based on an understanding of the risks and benefits. So there's no change in the medical advice. That continues to be our guide. What has changed is to make sure that we have medical indemnity available for the doctors and the program availability where individuals seek under those conditions. But our approach has always been to follow the medical advice, and that ATAGI medical advice is clear. It's set out, and as you know, we have made some difficult decisions to ensure that that medical advice has been followed. And I'd note that Queensland, and I thank them for this, is continuing to administer through the Queensland Health Programs AstraZeneca. I believe it's 89,000 doses of AstraZeneca. I'm advised by the vaccine rollout program have been administered by Queensland Health, and they continue to do that.
So they're now actively discouraging AstraZeneca for that cohort. How does that affect public confidence in the vaccination program?
Well, I think the medical advice, and I have complete respect for all involved here, the medical advice has been clear, and I've stood twice in the Parliament House briefing room alongside the Chief Medical Officer and Professor Brendan Murphy, and either the Prime Minister in one case or Lieutenant General Fruin in another, and outlined that the ATAGI medical advice is first for over 50s and then for over 60s, that AstraZeneca is preferred for over 60s and Pfizer is preferred for over 50s. I'll just wait for one second.
Level 1, Bansfield. Cocoa, North Building, Level 1, Bansfield.
So no change in that medical advice. That has been and continues to be the case. It continues to be the guiding light. But what we have done is recognise that the doctors themselves have been seeking indemnity, and that's been confirmed again today by the Expenditure Review Committee. The Prime Minister has asked me to confirm that that is proceeding, that's in place, that's been endorsed, and so I think that's important, that what has been the ATAGI advice continues to be the ATAGI advice, and ATAGI advice has always contemplated that where an individual had informed consent, they may elect to do so. But our statement on preferred is unchanged, and that remains exactly as ATAGI set out.
If a person is perfectly healthy and under 40 and they want to get the AstraZeneca vaccine, when they go and make a booking at a doctor, should they expect to receive the vaccine?
Well, I certainly would never step between a patient and a doctor. That has always been my principle throughout my time in this role. The medical advice, which has been accepted and implemented by the government, is that ATAGI says that AstraZeneca is preferred for over 60s, Pfizer is preferred for under 60s, and I've just read out ATAGI's actual advice about informed consent.
So if Pfizer is the preferred vaccine for under 40s, why would the Prime Minister then make announcements encouraging people to talk to their doctors about AstraZeneca? Just seems to be a bit contradictory, right?
Well, I would note that Queensland Health is continuing to administer, I think, 89,000 doses, and that they have administered around Australia, 4.7 million doses. Around the world, over 500 million doses. It's been the backbone of the UK program. And we were just discussing before that, in fact, all of us, the four of us, have all received the AstraZeneca vaccine. And so it's an important part. It's an important part of our national armoury, and the advice remains very clear that AstraZeneca is preferred for the over 60s, Pfizer is preferred for the under 60s, and the ATAGI advice, as I've set out, about informed consent is exactly what has been reaffirmed, but that actually has been their advice throughout, and that remains unchanged.
How is it possible for the Commonwealth and the states to be so opposed on that situation?
Well, I think there are two different things here. There's no disagreement on the medical advice.
They're actively discouraging it. They're saying don't, because it'll cost lives. The Chief Health Officer in Queensland's gone that far. How can that happen?
Well, I think what we have is very clear ATAGI advice that remains the national advice.
How can you be so...
I can't speak for other individuals.
Right, but you're our Health Minister. You're our Commonwealth Health Minister. How can you find yourself and us in this position?
Well, we have set out and followed the ATAGI advice. Indeed, I've been part of I've been part of the difficult decisions we've made to follow that ATAGI advice of making the presentations to the nation with regards to the over 50s and then the over 60s. And that ATAGI advice includes the informed consent element, which I've set out. I'll let others speak for themselves, and we deeply respect the fact that throughout the course of the pandemic there have been a range of views put forward, but the critical elements are that we have a national vaccine program which is based on the medical advice and continues to be based on that medical advice.
This decision to encourage under 40s to consult their doctors about AstraZeneca, why wasn't that announcement why wasn't there consultation with National Cabinet before the Prime Minister made an announcement like that?
Well, the Prime Minister took the medical indemnity question to the National Cabinet, and it was noted. It was actually expressly included in the National Cabinet announcements on the night.
And were the Chief Health Officers from the various states consulted about the Prime Minister going out and encouraging under 40s to talk to their doctor?
Well, I think the point here is always to make sure that people do have discussions with their doctors, and that's an important part of why we've provided consultation items, firstly for the above 50s, and then the consultation items, as requested by the medical profession, were provided and extended to all patients. And again, that's been reaffirmed and confirmed by the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet just today. So they're the things. I think that the critical point here, what we're seeing is a record number of tests today, near one of our highest days of vaccinations. We've seen over 50% of 50s, over 60% of 60s, and nearly 70% of 70s who've been vaccinated. If you are over 60, can I again reaffirm the national advice that you remain in a vulnerable group, that there is plentiful vaccine. We wish you to come forward to follow that medical advice, and to come forward if you've had a first dose for your second dose. So just to put everything into context this week, no change in the medical advice, but the provision of consultation items and indemnity, both of which were sought by the medical community, and I think that's the appropriate thing to do. And again, I've also set out the informed consent position, which remains unchanged from ATAGI, and they have published that previously. And so what we've done is simply acknowledge that existing informed consent position. All right.
Do you see any merit in the call to reduce the number of international travellers, at least in the short term?
Look, one of these things is, as we've seen in some of the newspapers, the reports of people coming home to see dying loved ones, people coming home for the most profound human reasons, or new medical researchers, for places such as the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, to add to the capacity of Australia And so we're in a position that almost no other country is. No country is immune, but we are better protected than almost any other nation. We see that with the fact that we've now had over 2.1 million lives lost in Australia in the world. We have now had over 2.1 million lives lost globally to COVID this year alone, but no person has caught COVID in Australia and died.
That's physical isolation, then what else has been done to try to counter it?
Well, we have 5 rings to our containment: borders, testing, tracing, distancing and vaccination. And it's the combination of those which has allowed us to achieve outcomes that almost no other country has. Again, I've heard the UK cited a couple of times. In the last 2 days, they've had over 20,000 cases each day. They have over 290 people on ventilation, and we have no Australians on ventilation for COVID. So what we're doing, it's difficult, it's always challenging. No country is immune. We simply happen to be in a more fortunate position through the combination of measures than almost any other country. I'll take one more.
Did the Prime Minister speak at all on Monday night about the agreement of National Cabinet regarding AstraZeneca at all? Is that possible?
No, the Prime Minister was very clear. He set out that National Cabinet had noted the national security's position, and he said this both in his words and in writing with regards to medical indemnity.
All right. One more, please. Should it be mandatory for people coming back to Australia to be vaccinated?
Look, that would be a matter for the AHPPC, and that's one item, as ever. One of the critical things is to follow that medical advice. How is it that we've protected ourselves? We've acted early. We've taken decisions. There's always continuous improvement. This week we've added continuous improvement to both the aged care system with the mandatory vaccination. It did take some time to get that medical advice. We tried on a number of occasions, but ultimately it was provided, and I'm pleased and thankful for that. And we also took the decisions, obviously following one particular case, to ensure that all states and territories will mandate that everyone associated with the quarantine program would be vaccinated if they're to participate in it, and the decision following the case in Queensland, which was certainly an outlier in terms of national practice as far as I'm aware, for domestic patients who are being quarantined on interstate travel not to be housed in the same facility as international. That was a particular practice in Queensland, and there was, I believe, unanimous support for making sure that that isn't happening around the country. So continuous improvement, rapid decisions, these are the things that are helping to save lives and protect lives, and that's why we're in a position that at this point in time, no Australian has caught COVID and passed from it in 2021. Around the world, over 2.1 million people have done it.